All right. Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Business Strategy Roundtable. We're welcoming back a good friend of mine today, John Robertson. He is he's the Business Strategy Roundtable resident AI expert and data science expert. So we're going to be talking about what it means for artificial intelligence to hallucinate today. But before we get into our main topic of conversation, John is going to show us his keyboard that he was telling me that he built. So I'm excited to learn more about that.
Okay, so I'm old. So for all you young guys out there, you have to protect your eyes and your wrists and your back.
Okay.
Right?
I can talk about wrists and backs, but you tell us about eyes.
Well, just make sure you're comfortable. Make sure your screen is bright enough. Make sure you get outside every day and get some natural sunlight in your eyeballs. There's actually everybody knows about the 3-color cones and the black and white rods. There's actually another set of
and if you don't do a Google search, probably.
Well, so that your eyes have those visual receptors that see colored light and black and white light, but there's actually another set on the back of the eyeball that just sees sunlight. So there are some blind people that, even though they're completely blind, they know whether it's daylight or not daylight, and it's that other set of receptors. Anyway, the health of the eye, requires sunlight. Yeah. Sunlight. And you could talk about circadian rhythms and sleep patterns and all kinds of things. And again, it's related to getting sunlight in your eyeballs. Okay, so my hands. Now, the first thing I did with my hands was I moved my mouse to my left hand.
Why?
And then what that does is that evens up. It does two things. It evens up how much you use each hand. So from a carpal tunnel standpoint, you're relaxing your right hand, your dominant hand, a little bit more. Now, The other thing is, as you'll notice with most keyboards, the left side of the keyboard, if you have your mouse next to it, it's a quick trip. And
there's quick trips in St. Louis too. It's one of the best gas stations around.
Where on the right-hand side of full keyboard, you've got the numeric keypad, and so it's a long trip.
It's useless.
And so it's from a typing standpoint, you're going to have less resettling time using your left hand with the mouse than using your right hand. And that resettling time.
Into the micro on this, man.
Yeah, I really am. I mean, okay.
It's impressive. You do a lot of it. Well, another thing you were telling me about before we went live was that you spent the past 2 weeks, 6 days a week, going line by line through code and ensuring that certain things were correct from a cybersecurity perspective, which is a really important thing for software. And you're an expert in that space as well. So that makes sense that you would want that to go as quickly as possible, because it sounds to me.
Right. And that's why I was showing you the keyboard, because I have macros, if you will, that quickly go to the next file, pull it up in a differential editor. I can quickly scan it and then close, and then it merges. It essentially copies from what the changes from one file to the other file. And so if my changes are in there, I have to hand pick it, right? I have to say, take that change and keep mine over here, and then take their change over there. But most of the files, it's only their changes. So I can quickly scan and say, yep, that file's okay, copy it, and then just get right to the next file. And so I use keyboard macros for that. And that's why I was talking about my keyboard. So I'm going to show it. I hope you don't get dizzy. But so
I'm always a little dizzy.
This is my two-handed keyboard, right?
And what you can see is, I'll zoom in a little bit. These are all thumb keys. So because you can thumb under your palm, you can thumb under your palm. It's no big deal.
Are
right?
your buttons? Oh, it's just reverse because it's the camera. Okay.
Yeah, I'm probably in a mirror mode.
Yep. I was like, do you have your buttons in different places too? I was like totally mesmerized. No,
but backwards because of
yeah.
And so, and part of what I was explaining is that these keys are palm keys. I just hit them with my palm. I don't hit them with my fingers. But in essence, the keyboard has what they call layers. And so if I hold this key down, it changes these to arrow keys, right? And if I hold this key down, it turns them into punctuation. And if I hold this key down, it turns them into like computer volume and mouse keys. I can move the mouse with my keyboard. So I can mouse click, I can mouse move, I can mouse right click.
Oh, wow.
And so this is all part of kind of a macro sense. And if when you're programming, your program editor has all these keys that do macros for you, such as I was describing. So I can load a differential between two files. I can quickly navigate between the changes. I can adopt one and take the other. When you're debugging, it's the same kind of thing. So like you might, in Windows, you do an Alt F4 to close the app, but when you're debugging, Control F2 does something, and Alt F7 does something else, and Control F7 does something else, and they you use some to step through the code, you use some to most of your programming editors, if you hover over a variable, you can use one key to see where that variable's used as a quick search, or you can use another key press to find where it's defined, right? So where the heck is this macro defined? Where is this variable defined? I guess the other thing I was going to show you is so this is the function key layer, and what the function key does is it turns one hand into a numeric keypad. So if you think of a number pad with
Sure.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I can hold that down, and when I hold this one down, it just becomes numbers. When I hold this one down, it becomes function keys in the numeric keypad fashion, right?
Well, you have to hold all of this in your mind. Like, the thing that is amazing to me is that, and I mean, of course it makes sense because you do this with such frequency that to learn it, to take the time to slow down and learn it, ultimately speeds up everything for you. But it's amazing to me to imagine you going through the process of creating, the space in your mind for what is where, and being able to conceptualize, because when you say it's layered, it quite literally is within the buttons. It's like
right.
And I'm sure you keep it in your mind that way.
Well, so that's especially with so when you walk, that's not academic. It's not in your mind. It's actually in your spinal cord as a macro.
Oh, wow.
And typing is the same way. Now, and so let's make a distinction here. If you have to watch yourself type, it's in your mind.
So you're still learning that way.
Well, you're observing. If your keyboard is unreliable, this is why, again, talk about your hands, and especially if you're professional, like a programmer or a typer.
Sure.
You want your typing to be like walking. You want it to be spinal cord macros, not academic in your head, push all the buttons. And it quickly gets to that macro stage. Now, if you're in the macro stage, your mind is doing the planning of, I want to cut and paste that text. So, and then it goes to a macro in your spinal cord to control V, control C, control V.
Like the feeling. It's less, you're not thinking, I'm going to control V. It's the feeling in your hand almost of what it is to do it.
Right. And so especially when you're programming, or if you're, maybe you're a creative writer, anytime your head can stay in your head and you can let your macros work for you. So in the case of I'm programming, I'm looking at code and I'm saying, how do I need to change this code to make it do this? Well, if I can let my typing be a macro, I can stay more focused on what I'm trying to accomplish.
Right. It's kind of like when I go driving.
Yeah, driving is more of a macro than it is.
Especially if you've done a lot of it, and you can kind of stay in the headspace while the body does the thing.
Yeah, and so you can see the creative benefit of touch typing. I mean, if you're going to type a lot, and so the creative benefit of building your own keyboard, because I guess the one thing I'll show is, so there's a circuit board here, right? And you can see.
You might have to zoom out. Oh no, we can see.
You can see that the keyboard switches are not where the PCB switches are.
This is above my technical knowledge, especially.
All I did is, you see those cables, those wires go back to where the circuit board, it's where the key would have been.
Oh, right. Oh,
so in other words,
yeah.
Did
you build this yourself? You literally built it yourself?
Well, I didn't build the PCB board was a kit.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. It's an ergo, they call it an ErgoDocs is the name of the kit. Okay. It's open source, so lots of people make them. There's lots of places that have them. But it wasn't comfortable to me. And I did 4 prototypes. This is the last prototype.
Okay. So you took something and adapted it.
I adapted it. And what I did is you can get, it has a stainless steel top plate.
What does that mean?
So
I do love stainless steel, especially for stretching pizzas on.
And it's brushed, right? So this is stainless steel.
Awesome. Yeah.
This is stainless steel, and it has holes for all the keys.
Right.
And then you can kind of see a light there.
Oh, and then when you press the key, it completes the circuit?
Yeah, that's what your switches do.
I didn't know that. That's so silly that I didn't know that, but I learn something new every day.
And what happens is the circuit board of the keyboard, they have what they call a N key rollover. The circuit board accumulates all the key presses and then decides what to send down the USB cable for what got typed.
Right. Based on which, does it give, I guess it gives a code that it understands.
Right. So the basic layout of the keyboard, the microcontroller is scanning to see if the switch is closed.
Okay. Right.
And then usually it tracks a state. So key down, quote unquote key down is when it goes from open to closed. If it stays closed, that's where you get then the keyboard generates repeated keys, and then key up is the end of the key press.
Right.
So a normal key press would be a down, the microcontroller sees it, and up, the microcontroller sends the key. But like we were talking about, if you do a control key, now the microcontroller is watching 2 keys at the same time. Right. So the control is being held, and the J key went up and down. So that's a control J.
Right.
Or a control shift key, control shift J. Now I've got 3 keys. Or in my case, layer for the function key, control F4.
I don't know what that one does, but.
Well, I mean, whatever it does. On the keyboard, it is the J. It's the letter J by layer for function key and the control. But because I pressed the layer, now all of a sudden, instead of J, that is the that's the numeric keypad.
Okay. So that informs what. I follow you. I follow you.
Anyway, so that's all the minutia. But at the high level, what I'm using by having a reliable keyboard, I don't have to watch myself type. If I don't have to watch myself type, I can stay in the thought process of what I'm trying to accomplish.
Right.
And so you can, if I were a journalist writing something, I could stay in my head saying, okay, here's what I'm trying to communicate. And my hands are just doing, delete this, add that, move up, move down.
I think some people would call that flow state, but that's not what this podcast is about today. So
it's not what it's about, but that is what a reliable keyboard will do for you. And then because it's split hand, I was talking about this earlier, my wrists are straight instead of bent. You have to recognize the 1800s keyboard was designed to slow the typist down because the machine would jam. The typewriters, had those little hammers, clickety-clack hammers. The typewriter would jam. So they moved the keys around to make it actually harder to type so that the typist was slower.
Yeah, because it reduced jamming.
Yeah, that's why A is over with the pinky. The pinky's the weakest finger to type with.
That's so wild.
Right?
Wow. I can make another recommendation for folks if we're talking about wrist strength and like making sure to take care of your wrists as somebody that does a lot of this type of thing. Yeah. Work out your forearms.
Yeah. Absolutely.
If you don't have enough density in your muscle mass on your forearms, then if you use a ton of your hand muscles, it's going to pull the muscle in the connective tissue in the wrist. So if you want to balance that, look up wrist exercises.
Yeah, if you'll do calisthenics with your large muscles before you type. Now, what's happening there is your fine-tuned muscles for your fingers become tired, so the large muscles help out. And when the large muscles help out, the muscle mass grows into the carpal tunnel, which is a tunnel in your wrist. And when the large muscle grows into that, it pinches the nerve and pinches the blood vessels.
Well,
so
the muscle
bad.
gets when you rotate, the muscle gets smashed.
Well, after it overgrows.
Right, exactly.
So normally it wouldn't be even in there, but because it's quote unquote helping out, it grows into there to help out.
Yeah. So you could also have to break up the muscle tissue in your hands. So if your hands are so tired that they're dense, like a tired bicep might be, like if you're using your finger and hand muscles constantly, then get something like I don't have one in here, but I got two of them floating around. Get like a lacrosse ball and put it on your palm and open up the muscles in your hand, because the reason that forearm muscle is having to assist is because it's done. It's out of energy. So if you break it back, it's fatigued. If you break it back open so it can heal properly, then you'll have more endurance in that muscle, and you won't have to have this one won't grow in there because it'll just stay in its own lane.
Right.
Okay, now talk about back. Because I got stuff for back to talk about too. And then we got to talk about AI, because I'm sure everybody's eye rolling.
Yeah, you probably have more on the back. It's to me, it's just make sure you have a great chair. And where I'm taller, I actually need a taller back chair. And so if you work in an office environment, they're just going to have the chair for everybody, meaning not for you. Right.
Unless you're a good representation of everybody.
Well, unless you're a good representation of everybody. So, make sure you have a comfortable ergonomic chair. And one of the things I do is I turned my armrests upside down. So the armrests in the chair I'm using are used for
mind upside down in this podcast.
Yeah. So the armrests were structural to the back and the seat. And flipping them upside down maintains the structure, but they're out of the way. And then I don't hunch my shoulders. If you have your elbows on a wrist, on an armrest, then you more naturally hunch your shoulders. Where if you don't have armrests at all, then your shoulders have a chance to relax.
We're gonna get these things. We're gonna get them out of here.
Yeah, like on your chair, they don't look structural. You could just take them off. It looks like they're just
right.
they're just at the bottom of the seat.
Yeah. One other thing for back, and then we'll go into the AI conversation, and I'm looking forward to that as well. If your low back hurts and you sit a lot, if you think about the way your body is when you're sitting, you're hinging at the hip, and these are your glutes, and this is your back. And if you're spending most of your day like this, your back and glutes are spending the majority of the day in a stretched position. And what that does is it elongates the muscle. And if you're not building that muscle back, then you're just losing muscle that's getting thinner and thinner and thinner. And if you get Hank Hill butt, where you have no glutes at all, you essentially get the muscle pulling at the joints in your low back, and it can feel completely debilitating. And the way to solve it is not to not use your low back, but it's actually the freaking opposite, which you have to create more muscle there, which is do a lightweight lift and then do a lot of stretching, and then a lightweight lift and a lot of stretching. But you can eventually get yourself out of that cycle of having that low back pain. So freaking fitness episode. I didn't know this was coming.
Yeah, fitness. all because I built a keyboard and I was telling you about merging lines of code and keyboard macros to get through it as quickly as I can. I mean, it's a 16 million line product, and not that I have to go through 16 million lines, but there are 2 weeks of files, and I'm not done yet.
Right. It's a lot to do, and it creates any efficiency you can create is valuable.
Right.
And especially with when you're somebody like yourself that's at the CTO level, you don't want to be mired down in the code if you don't have to be. So when you do have to be, moving quickly through it is a wise thing to set yourself up to be able to do, which
Right.
you've done. So those are the business strategies as far as it relates to the keyboard.
Well, and it segues into the artificial intelligence, because
All right.
what's becoming more and more a certain reality is businesses, for extreme economic reasons, businesses mandating their employees use artificial intelligence. Now, in general, how they're using
From an
it
efficiency perspective, you're right. That does segue. Wow.
Yeah.
You're in that flow state. I see you.
Trying to get us back to.
I know.
The point. I think the other point is that businesses are starting to realize another thing about artificial intelligence, and that is that its use always has to be guided by a human. And then the reciprocal of that is that the artificial intelligence is used as, in essence, the paralegal for the lawyer, or the kind of the bulk librarian researcher for the journalist. And you could think of, whatever your job you're doing, you could think that if you had an assistant that would do the first draft, that would save you time. Now, why does AI have to be monitored? In other words, current use of AI for business reasons requires a human interpret the values. So maybe it does the first draft, but the human has to review and edit the article.
Before we go too far into the human side of things, let me ask you a higher level question. I think it'll help us direct the AI conversation. What the hell does it mean for AI to hallucinate? Because I think that's a good place to start. Because some people hear it and they know, okay, the AI is giving not accurate information. But you've been doing data science and machine learning for a very long time, so you know in depth what is actually happening under the hood of AI when it is, quote, hallucinating. So let's start from that direction, and let's talk a little bit about the ones and zeros and the nuts and bolts and why hallucinations even happen. Because I think talking about that will give a really clear look into, okay, well, this is how we can deal with that.
Yeah, and the way I like to describe it, which I don't know if it gets across, is that there's a discontinuity between how humans think things work and how computers actually work.
Yes.
So and often it's called digital and analog. So humans are typically considered analog creatures. And as analog creatures, infinity kind of doesn't bother us. And we can conceptualize a smooth flow from zero to infinity, right? So you ask a human how fast they're going, and they don't really know, and they just kind of say a guess. There's not much that difference between 37 miles an hour and 40 miles an hour, right? It does. Their perception of time, their perception of how fast things are going by, it's analog,
sure.
Right? And if you think about it if you think about it from a continuity standpoint, they don't differentiate between when I sped up a little or when I slowed down a little bit. Now, when you look at the car's computer, it's digital.
Yeah.
And so you have discrete jumps from, you look at your speedometer dial, 37 is 37. There's no 37 and a half. There's no 37 and 3/4. Oh, it's 38 now. And so you have these discrete, in essence, you have a gap. Now, if you expand that out to artificial intelligence, when they build a model, because the computer is digital, there are gaps in the model. And so that's where hallucinations typically stem from. So you've asked for a question, and today's AI is all pattern matching. So you've asked a question, and it is going to find an answer that matches the pattern of an answer to the question that you asked, right? So there is some convolution in how many layers in the egg there are before you get to the kernel of truth. Now, the point is, if it's trying to find a pattern and it lands in one of these gap areas, it is unable to not give you an answer.
Right.
And so it finds, in essence, the pattern that matches the answer that you want, but it's using information it doesn't have.
Right.
And that's where from the human perspective, we just saw it make something up. Now what is commonly described is, okay, I want you to write this paper and give me the references and do a web search. So as a human, you think, you've done web searches, you think it's going to do its job, and you get the paper back and you get the references back. And on a hunch, you say, well, let me check that reference. And and it doesn't exist. The article title's made up, the author's made up, the date's made up. So that's what they're calling a hallucination, is you asked for a reference, it gave you a reference. It just happens to be completely falsified.
Right.
Now, did the AI maliciously lie to you? Or did the AI do its best job and give you what it thinks you asked for? And let's say you asked for 4 references and 3 of them are stellar, but the 4th one's made up.
Right.
So now you can kind of see why the business has to put the human back in charge. Maybe the AI does all the legwork, but it's kind of worth checking out those references. Not that you change the article any, you just say, well, that third reference isn't real. I'm just going to delete it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't, it's not really used in the article. It just happened to look like a reference.
It's absolutely an argument for it's a further argument for human in the loop as it relates to AI. I think that's absolutely true. And before we go too far into what does hallucinations mean for how businesses should utilize and engage with AI, I want to spend just a little bit more time kind of picking apart your description of what the hallucination actually is, because I think that in-depth understanding and maybe using I'm going to use a couple of other analogies similar to one that you've used. I think that clear understanding of what's happening when the AI hallucinates, I think that gives agency to the users of AI to effectively work within the confines of how the tool works to be able to produce the results that they're actually looking for. So,
right.
One thing,
and not only that, it from the human side, it adds an opportunity for creativity.
Absolutely, that's a beautiful point. That's a beautiful point.
Right, and like the case in point. So, one of the products that I represent in the enCircle marketplace is an AI penetration tester. So it's doing pattern matching for the various attacks. It has those patterns nailed down. The AI performs the attack on the target client. So it's a white hat type thing. It performs the attack and then determines whether the attack succeeded or not. So it has all these patterns in its head, and it's, for the most part, it just follows the instructions that it knows what to do. And then when it, quote unquote, gets bored, which is a human side, the AI doesn't get bored. But from the human side, when it gets bored, then it just says, well, I know all the patterns, so I'll just make up patterns. So it's hallucinating, right? And then it turns out that some of the made up patterns actually succeed in attacking the client's computer. Now, what do you do with that? Because what that means is that the penetration testing is in an area successfully attacking computers in ways that nobody knows about. It's not cataloged.
Right.
So your system's safer with you allowing the AI to hallucinate and running with it than it would be if you said no hallucinations allowed.
Well, and that's a really good point too that we'll get into is where do we draw the line? And before we get too far into the business strategy use element of it, I want to stay in this space of what it means for it to hallucinate. So you drew the distinction of analog and digital in the beginning of your explanation, and you used your car's speedometer as a reference for the function of digital. So it's showing you 37 and then it shows you 38. And there's a gap in between that you could call an infinite gap. 37.1, 37.11, 37.111. And that entire gap is a lack of information that the digital computer within the vehicle doesn't have or isn't able to produce and show you. I like to also use, and I think this is, you'll probably be able to tell me if I'm off base or on base. I also like to use, and I'm about to butcher what I know about calculus. So I'm totally aware of the fact I sound like a dipshit, but I'm going to stumble my way through it anyway.
Look, as a mathematician, I can help you out there.
I figured you would be able to, which is the only reason I'm even cautioning this debacle I'm about to walk through. So I understand in calculus, there are functions that have what can be called asymptotal values, where they continue towards a number, but they never actually achieve that number. So in the curve, moving further and further towards, let's say 1, for instance, and it's it's 0.75, 0.85, 0.91, 0.99, 0.999, 0.99999, and then it's always going towards 1, but it's never actually getting there. That space in between what is there and what is the next thing, where there's always another 9 that could be added, that is a gap in what the digital computer is able to produce. And it's based on energy usage and information and data that's available to it as it relates to the artificial intelligence. And when it's solving and it comes up to one of those gaps, what you described, John, is that the machines are currently programmed to produce a result, even if it doesn't have everything it needs to be able to produce a result. And we call it hallucinating. But what it really is it's a space in the math where it's not able to produce a result. And it can be explained. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation today, is because I feel like the anthropomorphization of AI and saying that it's hallucinating isn't exactly an accurate representation of what's going on with the artificial intelligence.
Well, and two things. The anthropomorphic, you're going to make me stumble on saying it. Anthropomorphization.
Right.
You got it right. I'm getting it wrong. That is the human side of it, right? So we get the results of AI and we're astounded. I asked this question and here's an eloquent response. That AI is super smart. The AI is not conscious of what it just gave you. Now, the flip side, we talked about the speedometer where in analog world, it's 37 and 3/4. In digital world, it is 38, right?
Yep.
Well, in the paragraph that you got back from AI, if you think of those 37 and a half and you get the first word, and then 34 and 3/4 and you get the second word. So if you think that each word came, that the model came for each word and made the nearest approximation, then you can, maybe it's not, the point is it's not just one gap. It's the gap spread out through the entire model, through every decision that it made to give you each word back in the highly crafted paragraph that follows a pattern of eloquence. So, of course you're going to get eloquence, but every now and then, and I've had this happen to me where, because they'll use AI for coding. So I've used AI for coding, and it's given me the exact opposite. If I had just taken the program, it would give me the opposite of what I was trying to accomplish, uninspected. And I would, it's a topic down the line. I would like to talk about kind of that gap of understanding as the human gate guards AI's output for downstream consumption. Because if you come at it naively, you're going to get the opposite result every now and then because of this hallucination. And that's why the human needs to kind of catch that of, maybe the AI didn't understand my question correctly. I have to rephrase it, which gets into hypnotizing, which is another aspect of AI that we should talk about.
Yep.
But what we're talking now is just catching the hallucinations, and hopefully there's enough of an understanding behind why there's such a thing that on the human side we call hallucination, because again, we're imposing a human aspect on the AI when it's a digital machine response. The machine of AI is constructing the most likely pattern that it would see as a response to the question.
Right. And that's the reason I wanted to hit this one more time before we touched on the strategies. And we can go right into human in the loop right after I make this point here. I wanted to make sure to touch on this because the idea that it's anthropomorphized and that it's going to do a human thing, it takes away from the agency of the human. And I think that's a huge, I think that's something to be wary of and cautious of as we move forward with artificial intelligence being more of a mainstay in our everyday lives. Because if we assume that it's more powerful than it is, then we take away the agency that we have to utilize it as a tool. So when we say it's doing something like hallucinating, what that does is anybody that doesn't understand the math behind the word hallucination assumes that there's some level of not being able to trust the tool. When the reality is there is some level of not being able to trust the tool, but that doesn't mean you can't use it. And if you understand the gap of how you can utilize it and still trust it, instead of hearing, oh, AI hallucinates, so then you never even learn to use it, I want to make sure that type of thing doesn't happen.
Let's go a little bit deeper, because I think out of all the arguments we've had back and forth over hallucination, I think you've actually hit on the very kernel and essence behind this whole thing, and that is anthropomorphizing AI means that you as a human misinterpret what AI is doing. So that fundamental misinterpretation is what leads to all the downstream cascade of misuse, of not using it to its fullest, all those kinds of things. So human instinct is to see the results of AI and to see the sophistication and to be amazed at it and its astounding things, when that does the human the disservice, because it makes the human second guess themselves in a sense.
Yeah.
When the human should just be saying, well, of course it's a machine. Of course it did a great first draft. Thanks. It's just like to me, there's a transition where, in the late 90s, the world changed because of Google search. And we don't recognize, we're so fluent in it now, we don't recognize it. And I think in 10 years, we'll be so fluent in AI, we won't recognize it. So it's really just this transition where we're getting used to it right now, that misinterpreting AI can have a huge effect on whether you'll be able to utilize it. Now, in 10 years, everybody's going to utilize it the same way.
Now is the time that people can use the tool to create agency in their lives. If you're somebody that's in a low-income community and you're able to understand how to use AI, you could be a small business owner because of the efficiency that the tool gives you. But if you're so afraid that it's going to hallucinate and fuck you over that you don't even learn how to use it, then in 10 years, this moment of tremendous opportunity has been squandered. So when we utilize the language of hallucinate instead of saying something that lends more towards computer or mathematics, like I like to say extrapolate, incorrectly extrapolated.
Right.
I feel like the hallucinate takes away agency from human, where just recognizing an error in the output, like saying it more machine based, then assumes to the human that they have to do something to fix the machine.
Right. I'd say that more strongly.
Please.
Using incorrect language, anthropomorphizing AI puts the human in the incorrect mindset to use it effectively.
Yeah.
And I think this has always been your deep-seated grudge against me calling it hallucination.
Not you, not you. Mainstream media calling it that, because if mainstream media calls it a hallucination, then anybody that has tertiary knowledge about AI hears that and they make their assumptions. So they need to say something that's more closely aligned with what's actually happening.
Yeah, it's more scientific, precise.
Right.
Where it's providing inaccurate results within some margin of error.
Right.
Right. And so
We could talk
It's
business strategies now.
Yeah, it's giving you the wrong answer.
Right. Well, and that's an argument for the strategies related to human in the loop, which is take agency. If you have a team that's utilizing AI, if you yourself are utilizing AI, if you have AI doing a function in the business that's on some type of automation, there needs to be a human in the loop that's either checking output or checking to make sure that continuation is going. You need to be checking the work that you produce to make sure that it was actually intended. Overly trusting the AI is going to lead to moments where the AI steps in the gaps of its understanding and produces something imperfect. So that's human in the loop, which we've talked a little bit about in the past and a little bit about today. One thing that I want to bring up, which is kind of a strategy either for businesses creating their own systems or startups in the AI space that are trying to figure out how to deliver the best possible product to their users. Limiting the size of what the AI model is looking at can be really helpful in reducing where and how misrepresentations or extrapolations, incorrect extrapolations happen. And I think that looks like one of two things. Either providing large language models with a confidence meter or the ability to recognize when it is unsure or where it doesn't have data to represent what it's producing, or utilizing less energy or smaller models for more specific circumstances, so that you're able to get into the 0.999999999 and really reduce the opportunities for incorrect extrapolations or the need to extrapolate.
So this isn't. It's slightly tangential to what you're talking about. I've been meeting with business leaders off and on about AI, and one of the things that's been fascinating me is there's a dynamic between big tech AI and proprietary AI, and even big tech AI is exposing what they're doing so that it can be used in a proprietary fashion. So you don't necessarily have to abandon ChatGPT or Hugging Face or some of these other. Llama is the Facebook version,
Lucy Goose,
which has been released in the wild. So there may be some fascinating things that come out of the open source community around that. But anyway, where I'm headed is big tech on the surface. So if you go and want to solve your business problem with ChatGPT, one of the problems you have is that big tech has an incentive not to offend, and big tech has an incentive to be as broad as possible. So sometimes the most generic answer possible is not what your business needs. And so as a common theme, I've been seeing businesses gravitate pretty strongly, especially the ones with a head start, to their own AI models and training their own data. And one of the things that does, especially if they're using customer data, and I can give a couple of concrete examples. They have in the area, I met with a leader of a storage facilities. Now, why would a storage facility use AI? And what they use it for is they track customer patterns, and they're looking for two things. They're looking for fraudulent use, and they're looking for early move outs, even if it's like 3 days. If somebody moves out 3 days early, and then they can resell that unit, he says that can be $10 million a year. And I thought, really? But he's got, I think, 40,000 units across the United States. So, okay, I guess it could be. But part of what this storage unit company is doing is they want to maximize their customer satisfaction, maximize or minimize empty, unutilized space. And so, they've done Bluetooth locks and more cameras and more lights and just things, and they just track when people come to the premise and leave. And I think the other thing they do is they also direct their advertising through the AI. Now, my point is that they only use their own data for this. ChatGTP is not helping them. And so they have the data scientists, they harvest their own data, they track it well. Yeah. And it's similar, there was a legal firm that does class action lawsuits, and you can see why they would use it to identify customers,
yeah,
identify victims.
Well, and certainty of case, you don't want to go all the way through a class act. I mean, it's costly,
Well, right. And their AI model includes, because they partner with lawyers, so with lawyers in the area. So part of their AI is who's been affected, and part of their AI is what law firms in the area have a higher chance of litigating the deal. And so they're doing both of those things on customer data that you don't want released in the wild. You have to highly protect it.
It's like Moneyball with the Oakland A's, but with a bunch of friggin' lawyers. I just snort laughed. Oh no.
The hospitality industry is kind of in the same thing, and this is where there is kind of a dark side to AI. There's been several research papers on how do you muddy AI, big tech AI, and yes, crafty, crafty students have gone in to say, here's how easy it is to mess up a ChatGTP run. And so if you were a hospitality industry or an Airbnb or something like that, and you could shift people away from your competitors and towards you with a few simple inputs. Now, when somebody goes to ChatGPT and says, hey, what's good to do in Santa Barbara? And you've got a little bit of an edge. I mean, that's no different than search engine optimization. You just have AI engine optimization.
Yeah.
And the research papers are out there now. At some point, it's going to become the same as search engine optimization. There will be a whole industry on here's how you fake out ChatGTP. Well, that's another argument for a business not rely solely on ChatGTP.
Well, and start now to not rely. If you have the capacity to, well, two things are at play. So if you have the capacity to build your own freaking internal model, do that, because you'll be able to evolve it over time, and you'll know where the potholes are, where it has to extrapolate or assume, as opposed to having concrete information. And knowing where your model is weak is like knowing where your team is weak. And if your AI is going to be a part of your team, you got to figure that out. So if you can start with creating your own model now because you have those types of resources, that's super cool.
Well, let me keep
going. Hold on, let me keep going, because I got a couple of points on this one. If you don't have the ability to do that, start looking into organizations like John's that are aggregating and grouping together solutions that are specific and niche. So if you can't build your own niche solution, there are people who are experts in artificial intelligence that are taking all of the different niche specific tools and putting them into spaces and giving access to those spaces, so that people that aren't quite to the point where they can have their own model, but know they need to be utilizing it and are moving in that direction, have access to specific and niche tools. That can prevent what your business from being negatively affected by other businesses need or desire to be largely applicable to as many people as possible, or maybe influenced by not hurting feelings and being PC or whatever. And it also can give you a reduction in the amount of space where the artificial intelligence would have to hallucinate, because you're getting those specific models. So that's if you can't get your own, build your own, start looking for those types of marketplaces where artificial intelligence specific solutions are. And then the last thing is, if you're building an artificial intelligence solution, whether it be a marketplace, whether it be something for your own business, or whether it be something that you want to sell as a niche solution, really consider having some type of way to communicate when your AI doesn't know if it's right. Because the solutions that begin to do that first are going to win confidence with the consumer, and confidence with the consumer is everything. Win the crowd and you win. And it starts with confidence and trust.
And the only thing I would modify is, I've bashed big tech AI. That doesn't mean I think you shouldn't use it. You should use it.
Just know what you're doing.
Just know what you're doing. And in part because most of the business leaders that I've talked to, it took them 2 years to get the model working the way they needed it to work. So in the meantime, what is $25 a month for ChatGPT, especially if it helps you have 8 times the productivity?
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of the business side of that. Is I'm going to pay $25 a month and get 8 times the productivity. I'm going to be able to address 8 times the clients that I address. Or my programmers are going to be 8 times more efficient at writing code, or whatever it is. My customer service, I move everybody to tier 2, and tier 1 is all an AI chatbot, with tier 2 just kind of watching things happen and jumping in when needed. So I've made everybody more efficient. I've increased my customer service. I don't have all the knowledge base I need because ChatGPT doesn't have that, but I'm folding that in the code. So that's the only thing. Is I'm not saying to avoid the big tech. I'm just saying that the businesses I've seen from a long-term strategic standpoint, they've migrated to their own artificial intelligence, either for privacy reasons or the targeted business solution reasons. They needed the generic AI really isn't helping them. They need it refined to the specific of what the business solution is.
John, thank you for being here today and sharing your math, machine learning, coding, and AI expertise with us. You want to tell everybody a little bit about some of the projects that you're working on, and then I'll do the same thing, and we'll head into Friday afternoon.
Sure.
I guess you're still on Friday morning out there in the mountains.
Yeah, I've got another 45 minutes of quote unquote morning. So enCircle Marketplace, we do essentially support. It's part association and part vendors that support to manage service providers in providing their clients with to meet their security needs. So, fire scanners. We talked a little bit about the AI penetration tester, which to me, I'm very enthusiastic. This is a workforce multiplication. Sure, you have your pen testers and your customer handlers manage the reports that the AI generates, but you let the AI work 24/7, right? Let your people have an 8 to 5 job, instead of, and let the AI work around the clock. Anyway.
Cool. Tri-Unity Strategies helps IT service providers, restaurants, and startups scale and grow their businesses. We either help by supporting and growing competencies in your organization, or we provide services around sales, marketing, and team building. We have 4 free maturity assessments. 3 of them are business related, and one of them is fitness related on our homepage. So that's a new thing that we have launched. So I'm excited to share that. And so if you're interested in getting a free little next step look into what you should do in either sales, marketing, operations, or your fitness journey, go ahead and do one of those free no-touch assessments on our website. And then next week, we are having Chris Johnson from CompTIA joining us for a conversation about how MSPs actually do cybersecurity. So we're going to get into the nuts and bolts on what it really looks like to be doing cybersecurity. And that's going to be great to learn from him because he and that CompTIA organization are tremendous. So thank you so much, John, for being here. Happy Friday, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks. See you.